cold steel ratcheting around my twin sister's wrists was supposed to belong to me. Standing on wet pavement in my favorite yellow raincoat, she nervously fingered my stolen ID. She thought she was leaving me to rot for her crimes. She didn't realize I remembered bleeding out in a concrete prison cell. Nursing lukewarm coffee behind my apartment window, I grinned as red and blue strobes violently illuminated her panicked face. She wanted my life. I gave it away. I woke up choking on stale air. My hands flew to my stomach, fingers digging into the thin fabric of my t-shirt, searching for the wet, hot tear of the shank. There was nothing, just intact skin and the erratic, frantic thumping of my own pulse. I rolled off the mattress and hit the floor hard. The cheap laminate was freezing against my knees. I dragged in breath after breath, my lungs burning like I'd just breached the surface of a frozen lake. The smell hit me next. Sickly, sweet, synthetic vanilla. Harper's favorite candle. I was in our apartment, the one with the peeling wallpaper near the baseboards and the radiator that clanked like a dying engine. I scrambled up my legs, shaking so violently I had to lean against the dresser. My reflection in the mirror was wrong. My hair was longer, lacking the uneven chop I'd given myself in lockup. My cheekbones weren't hollowed out from a year of institutional slop. I looked healthy. I looked young. My phone was charging on the nightstand. The screen lit up when I swiped a trembling thumb across it. October 14th, 2 weeks. I was exactly 2 weeks out from the night the federal agents kicked our door down. 2 weeks from the night Harper stood crying in her pajamas, pointing a trembling finger at me while they read the charges. Wire fraud, embezzlement, obstruction, $2 million drained from the city housing grant, funneled through offshore accounts that were miraculously tied to my name. My stomach lurched. I dry heaved over the trash can, a sour taste flooding the back of my throat, tasting like copper and old coffee. I was back. I was actually back. Ilara, you alive in there? The voice came through the thin drywall, muffled, bubbly, entirely devoid of guilt. Harper, I froze. A sudden violent white noise roared in my ears. My hands curled into fists, the fingernails biting into my palms, so hard the skin threatened to split. The urge to rip the door open, march across the hall, and wrap my hands around her throat was a physical pressure in my chest. I wanted to squeeze until that synthetic vanilla smell was replaced by the iron tang of blood. I remembered the cold concrete floor of the prison shower. I remembered the guard looking the other way. I remembered the sharp tearing agony between my ribs, and knowing as my vision went dark that my twin sister was sleeping soundly in a luxury condo bought with my stolen life. Ilara, I'm making coffee, she yelled again. I closed my eyes. The white noise slowly receded, leaving behind a cold, humming clarity. Killing her would only put me back in a cell. Screaming at her would only make her hide her tracks better. Harper wasn't a mastermind. She was just incredibly, ruthlessly selfish. She survived by finding a host and leeching them dry. If I ran, she would find another scapegoat. Or worse, she'd pin it on me in absentia, leaving me looking over my shoulder for the rest of my life. No, running was for prey. I uncurled my fists, shaking the tension out of my shoulders. I walked to the bedroom door, unlocked it, and stepped into the hallway. Harper was in the kitchen, humming. She wore an oversized cashmere sweater, one she couldn't afford, on her administrative salary, and her blonde hair was perfectly styled. She turned, offering a bright, vacant smile. It was the same smile she used when she broke my favorite mug in third grade and blamed the cat. Wide, guiltless, lethal. Morning, she chirped, sliding a mug across the counter. You look terrible. Didn't sleep. I looked at the mug. The steam twisted in the air. I reached out and wrapped my cold fingers around the ceramic. Nightmares, I said. My voice sounded like gravel, but I managed a weak, exhausted smile. Just really bad nightmares. Well, drink up. She patted my arm. Her touch made my skin crawl 1,000 invisible insects skittering beneath my epidermis. We have a big week ahead. Silas wants those quarterly reports by Friday. Silas. Our boss. The man Harper was currently sleeping with, and the man whose login credentials she was using to authorize the fake transfers. Right, I muttered, taking a sip of the bitter coffee. Wouldn't want to let Silas down. Harper's eyes flickered a momentary lapse in her bubbly facade, just a tiny twitch of her left eyelid. She was already setting the trap. She was already figuring out how to swap our digital footprints. In the past timeline, I had fought the charges. I had screamed my innocence. I had hired a public defender who looked at me with tired, disbelieving eyes. This time, I wasn't going to fight the current. I was going to let Harper build her perfect little trap, and then I was going to help her walk right into it. The next 10 days were an exercise in psychological torture. Every morning, I woke up with a phantom ache in my side. Every day, I sat in the cramped cubicle next to Harper's glass-walled office at the nonprofit, listening to her type, listening to her take hushed phone calls. The air in the office always smelled faintly of burnt popcorn and ozone from the ancient copy machine. She was clumsy, astonishingly so. In my first life, I had been too busy drowning in my own workload to notice the glaring red flags. This time, they looked like fireworks. Hey, Chloe. Harper leaned over the partition on a Tuesday, chewing the end of a pink pen. My wrist is absolutely killing me. Carpal tunnel acting up again. Could you sign for these invoices? She slid a stack of manila folders onto my desk. I stared at them. I knew what they were. They were the dummy receipts for the shell company she'd set up. In the old life, I had blindly scribbled my initials, too stressed by my own deadlines to read the letterhead. I looked up at her. Her eyes were wide, pleading, but there was a tight, calculated pinch at the corners of her mouth. She was holding her breath. Sure, I said, my voice flat. Leave them. She exhaled softly. You're a lifesaver. As she walked away, the scent of her peach blossom body spray lingered, making me slightly nauseous. I picked up my pen. I didn't just initial them. I signed my full name, making sure my handwriting was clear, legible, and undeniable. I signed every single one of my own death warrants, pressing the ballpoint into the paper until it nearly tore. It felt wrong. Every survival instinct I had screamed at me, to shred the folders, to throw them in her face, to expose her, right then and there. But exposing her now would only get her a slap on the wrist, a suspended sentence. She needed to be caught with the money, with the ledger, in the act of fleeing. She needed to be destroyed. That night, I took the bus to a neighborhood 3 zip codes away. The rain was a fine, freezing mist that clung to my eyelashes and soaked through my cheap canvas sneakers. I bought a prepaid burner phone from a bodega that smelled of stale beer and old limes. I sat on a damp bus bench under a flickering street lamp, my hands trembling, as I dialed the local FBI field office tip line. The automated voice clicked over to a live operator. Tip line, Agent Miller. I swallowed the lump of panic in my throat. I have information regarding the missing municipal grant funds from the Horizon Housing Initiative, I said. My voice was disguised, lowered and muffled by the sleeve of my jacket. The primary suspect is planning to flee the country on the 28th. She has a physical ledger containing all the offshore routing numbers. Sir, ma'am, can I get your name? The agent's voice sharpened the rustle of paper, audible over the line. The suspect's name, I continued ignoring him, is Ilara. I gave my own full name. I gave my own birth date. I gave my own social security number. Saying the words out loud felt like swallowing glass. I was digging my own grave. I was relying entirely on Harper's predictability. If she didn't take the bait, if she didn't try to steal my identity to make her escape, I had just confessed to a federal crime I didn't commit. She will be carrying the ledger in a yellow raincoat, I added. She'll be leaving from the apartment on 4th and Elm around 10 p.m. I hung up. I dropped the phone into a storm drain, watching the black plastic disappear into the rushing, muddy water. When I got home, the apartment was quiet. Harper was asleep. I walked into my bedroom and opened my closet. The yellow raincoat hung there, bright and conspicuous. I reached into my bag and pulled out the small, leather-bound notebook I had swiped from Harper's desk earlier that day. It was her backup. She was arrogant enough to keep physical records of her passwords because she never believed anyone would look. I slipped the notebook deep into the interior lining pocket of the yellow coat. I zipped it shut. The trap was set. All the lamb had to do was put on the wolf's clothing. October 28th. The air pressure in the apartment felt heavy, like the breathless quiet before a tornado touches down. Outside, a steady rhythmic rain drummed against the warped window panes. Inside, the silence was deafening. I sat on the faded floral sofa, a textbook open on my lap, pretending to read. The words were just meaningless black shapes. My pulse was a dull, annoying thud behind my eyes. Harper emerged from the kitchen at 8:30 p.m. She was wearing dark jeans, a black turtleneck, and an expression of strained casualty. She carried 2 mugs. The clinking of the spoons against the ceramic echoed in the small room. Made some chamomile. She said, her voice a little too high, a little too tight. You've been looking so stressed lately, Chloe. Thought it might help you sleep. She set the mug on the coffee table in front of me. I stared at the pale, yellow liquid. I didn't need to look closely to know there was a faint, powdery residue at the bottom. Crushed Xanax. In my past life, I had drunk it gratefully, thanking her for her kindness. I had woken up 36 hours later, handcuffed to a hospital bed, a police officer standing guard at the door. Thanks, Harp, I said, not looking up from my book. I'll drink it in a minute. She hovered. Drink it while it's hot. Seriously, it'll help. I looked up, meeting her eyes. For a fraction of a second, I saw it. The guilt, it was microscopic, buried under layers of self-preservation and greed, but it was there. She knew what she was doing to me. She was sacrificing her own blood to save her skin. I offered her a tired smile. You're a good sister, Harper. She flinched. Just a tiny tightening of her jaw. I'm going to take a shower, she muttered, turning away quickly. Drink your tea. The moment the bathroom door clicked shut and the water turned on, I moved. I grabbed the mug, walked silently to the kitchen, and poured the chamomile down the sink, rinsing the basin quickly to wash away the powder. I filled the mug with plain hot water. From the kettle, walked back to the couch and set it down. 15 minutes later, the water turned off. I quickly lay back against the armrest, letting my textbook slip to the floor with a soft thud. I closed my eyes, relaxed my jaw, and slowed my breathing. In 2, 3, 4, out, 2, 3, 4. The bathroom door opened. Steam rolled into the hallway, carrying the smell of peach blossom body wash. Harper's footsteps were light hesitant. They stopped near the sofa. I could feel her standing over me, the ambient heat of her body, the faint, nervous hitch in her breathing. "Ilara," she whispered. I didn't move. I kept my breathing deep and even. I felt her reach into my pocket. Her fingers were cold. She slipped my phone out. Then she pulled my wallet from the side table. The soft tier of Velcro. The slide of plastic. She was taking my driver's license, my credit cards. I felt the slight weight of her own cards being shoved into my wallet in return. It was agonizing. A cramp started to form in my left calf, a tight knot of muscle begging to be stretched, but I forced myself to remain entirely limp. "Sorry, Chloe," she whispered into the dark room. Her voice cracked slightly. Survival of the fittest. I heard her walk to the closet. The distinct swish of the waterproof fabric as she pulled my yellow raincoat off the hanger. She was slipping into my identity. She was taking the bait. The front door opened, a gust of damp hallway air washing over the room, and then clicked shut. The deadbolt slid into place. I opened my eyes. I didn't waste a second. I threw the cheap throw blanket off my legs, ignoring the cramp in my calf, and sprinted to the window. I pressed my forehead against the cold glass, looking down at the street 4 stories below. The streetlights cast long, distorted reflections on the wet asphalt. A black sedan, an Uber she had undoubtedly ordered under my name, was idling by the curb. Harper stepped out of the building. Even from up here, the yellow raincoat was blindingly bright against the dreary night. She pulled the hood up, clutching a duffel bag to her chest, and hurried toward the idling car. She reached for the door handle. Suddenly, the street exploded with light. Headlights flared from the alleyway across the street. 2 unmarked SUVs aggressively boxed the Uber in their tires, screeching against the wet pavement. Red and blue strobes ignited violently, strobing across the brick facades of the buildings. 4 men in dark windbreakers poured out of the vehicles. Even over the rain, I could hear the harsh, clipped barks of their commands. "Hands! Let me see your hands." Step away from the vehicle. Harper froze. From 4 stories up, she looked like a small, terrified insect, pinned under a microscope. She dropped the duffel bag. She raised her hands, shaking her head frantically. I could see her mouth moving. I opened the window, just a crack. The cold air hit my face, carrying her shrill, panicked voice up to me. "Wait, no, you don't understand," Harper screamed, as 2 agents grabbed her arms, spinning her around and slamming her chest against the hood of the black sedan. "I'm not her. I'm not Ilara. My name is Harper." An agent patted down the pockets of the yellow coat. He pulled out the leather notebook. He flipped it open, shining a small flashlight on the pages, then nodded to the others. "Sure you are," a gruff voice drifted up through the rain. "And I'm the Pope. You've got Ilara's ID, Ilara's coat, and the missing ledger, ma'am. You have the right to remain silent." The handcuffs came out. The metallic snick-snick of the ratchets tightening around her wrists was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. It wasn't triumphant, though. I didn't feel like a hero. I felt hollowed out, exhausted, and incredibly dirty. But as they shoved my sobbing twin sister into the back of the SUV, A slow, grim smile stretched across my face. Survival of the fittest, indeed. The flashing lights down on the street finally bled out, swallowed by the relentless downpour. The black SUVs drove away, taking my twin sister with them. I didn't cheer. I didn't pour myself a glass of wine. I slid down the wall until my jeans hit the cheap laminate floor, pulled my knees to my chest, and pressed the heels of my hands into my eye sockets until bursts of static color flared in the darkness. The adrenaline was leaving my bloodstream, and the crash was violently physical. My teeth started to chatter. A cold sweat broke out across my collarbones. I dry heaved twice, the empty spasms tearing at my stomach muscles, before I forced myself to take a slow, shuddering breath. It was done. The mechanism had triggered. But I wasn't safe yet. I stood up. My legs felt like they were made of wet sand. I walked into the kitchen and stared at the mug of hot water on the coffee table. I picked it up, carried it to the sink, and poured it down the drain. I washed the mug with dish soap, scrubbing the ceramic until my knuckles ached, erasing any trace of the chamomile and the crushed Xanax she had tried to feed me. Then I walked into my bedroom, stripped off my clothes, and put on an oversized faded university t-shirt. I crawled under the heavy duvet, leaving the bedside lamp on, and waited. The knock came at 2:14 a.m. It wasn't a polite tap. It was a heavy, authoritative pounding that rattled the flimsy door in its frame. Police. I let them knock twice more before I stumbled out of bed. I didn't have to fake the exhaustion. My bones felt heavy with it. I rubbed my eyes, walked to the door, and unfastened the deadbolt. Two men stood in the hallway. The taller one wearing a damp trench coat that smelled sharply of wet wool and stale cigarette smoke held up a gold badge. "Ilara Davis?" he asked. His voice was a low gravel, his eyes scanning my face, flicking down to my bare legs, then back up. I blinked, squinting against the harsh glare of the hallway fluorescence. "Yes. Who are you? What time is it?" "Agent Harrison, FBI. This is Agent Miller." He gestured to the younger man beside him. "We need to come inside, ma'am. It's about your sister Harper." I let my mouth fall open, stepping back to let them in. "Harper, did something happen? Is she okay?" The panic in my voice was real, but it wasn't for her. It was the residual trauma of the first timeline, the terrifying proximity of federal agents in my living room. My chest tightened. The phantom pain of the shank flared between my ribs, a sharp, white-hot prick. I pressed my forearm against my side to hide the flinch. Harrison walked into the center of the living room, his eyes taking in the worn sofa, the textbooks on the floor, the cramped kitchen. "She's in custody, Ms. Davis. She was apprehended attempting to flee the city." He paused, watching my face, like a hawk watching a field mouse. "She was carrying your identification. She was wearing your clothes, and she was in possession of a ledger tying this address to massive corporate fraud." I stumbled backward, hitting the edge of the kitchen counter. "What? No, Harper was just here. She made me tea. She went to take a shower." I pointed a trembling finger toward the bathroom. "She was right here. She left," Miller said gently, though his eyes were just as calculating. "She tried to board an international flight under your name." "My name," I choked out. I rushed to the side table, frantically, pulling open the drawer where I kept my wallet. I snatched it up, my fingers slipping on the faux leather. I ripped it open. The plastic window, where my driver's license should have been, was empty. In the card slots, the name Harper Davis stared back at me in raised silver lettering. I dropped the wallet on the floor. It hit the laminate with a pathetic smack. I pressed both hands over my mouth, letting the tears spill over. I didn't force them. I just thought about the cold, concrete floor of the prison shower. I thought about the year of my life that was stolen, the absolute crushing isolation of being blamed by the one person who was supposed to protect me. The tears came thick and fast, hot tracks burning down my cheeks. She took my ID. I sobbed, my voice cracking, muffled against my palms. Why would she do that? Why would she take my ID? Harrison's posture softened just a fraction. The rigid line of his shoulders dropped. He had seen this before. The bewildered family member. The collateral damage. Ms. Davis, Harrison said, pulling a small notepad from his pocket. Your sister is currently claiming that she is Ilara. She's claiming that you forced her into that car, that you planted the ledger on her. She's hysterical. You have our fingerprints on file. I said, my voice shaking as I wiped my nose with the back of my hand. We had to submit them for the background checks at the nonprofit. We're identical twins, Agent Harrison, but our fingerprints aren't the same. Check them. Please, check the fingerprints. Miller glanced at Harrison. The older agent gave a microscopic nod. They already had. That's why they were here talking to me like a victim, instead of dragging me out in cuffs. They had printed the screaming girl in the yellow coat, run it through the database, and found the match. Harper Davis. We know who you are, Ilara, Harrison said, his tone finally shifting from accusatory to sympathetic. But we need you to come down to the field office. We need a formal statement, and we need to know exactly what your sister did for Silas Vance at the Horizon Initiative. I nodded, wrapping my arms around my chest, hugging the phantom wound tight. I played the broken, betrayed sister perfectly, because beneath the performance, the betrayal had already broken me once. The FBI kept me for 6 hours. They brought me stale coffee in ribbed styrofoam cups that burned my fingers. And they asked me the same questions in 5 different ways. Did you ever see the ledger? No, I just thought she was taking work home. Did she ever ask you to sign anything? Yes. Sometimes she said her carpal tunnel was acting up. Was I not supposed to? Did you know about the Cayman accounts? I don't even know how to balance my own checking account. By the time the sun came up, painting the frost-covered windows of the precinct, a pale, sickly gray, they let me go. I was officially a victim of identity theft. Harper was facing a mountain of federal charges held without bail as a flight risk. But it wasn't over. The snake still had its head. At 9 a.m., I walked into the offices of the Horizon Housing Initiative. The air in the bullpen was thick with a buzzing, frantic energy. The phones were ringing off the hook, but nobody was answering them. The receptionist was huddled at her desk, aggressively chewing a thumbnail, staring at the muted television mounted on the wall. The local news was running a vague ticker about a federal probe into a city grant. I kept my head down, clutching my canvas tote bag, and walked straight toward the glass-walled office at the back. Silas's blinds were drawn. That was the first sign. In the 2 years I'd worked here, Silas never closed his blinds. He liked to look out over the cubicles, like a king surveying a particularly dull peasantry. I knocked twice, softly, and pushed the door open without waiting for an answer. The smell of the room hit me instantly. Fear, sweat heavy and sour, masked poorly by a desperate spray of expensive sandalwood cologne. Silas was standing behind his mahogany desk, frantically feeding manila folders into a heavy-duty industrial shredder. The machine was whining, struggling against the thick wads of paper. He snapped his head up when the door clicked shut. His face was flushed, the veins in his neck bulging against the tight collar of his custom dress shirt. "Elara!" He barked, his voice cracking slightly. He dropped the remaining folders on the desk and wiped his damp forehead with the back of his hand. "What the hell are you doing here? Where is your sister?" I stood by the door, making myself look small. I hunched my shoulders and let my eyes widen. "Silas, it's terrible. The police came to the apartment last night. They took Harper." Silas's face drained of color. The deep, ruddy flush vanished, leaving him looking like wet chalk. He sank into his leather executive chair, the leather groaning under his weight. "Took her? What do you mean, took her?" "They arrested her," I whispered, stepping closer to the desk. The hum of the shredder vibrated through the soles of my shoes. "They said something about embezzlement, about a ledger. Silas, she had my ID. She was trying to leave the country. I don't understand what's happening." He stared at me, his eyes darting frantically back and forth as he processed the information. He was trying to figure out if I was a threat. He was looking for the intelligence in my face, the awareness. I gave him nothing but wide, terrified innocence. In my first life, I had come to him crying, begging for help to prove my innocence. He had smiled, patted my hand, and then handed the feds the IP logs that Harper had spoofed to my terminal. "Did she?" Silas licked his dry lips, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Did she say anything to you before she left? Did she give you anything?" "No," I lied, my voice trembling. But she was acting so strange. She was panicked. She kept saying that she needed to clear the primary accounts before the FBI froze them. She said she had the routing numbers in her notebook, but she needed to log in from the main terminal to authorize the final sweep. Silas's eyes dilated. "She didn't clear them. She left before she could," I said, playing the confused messenger. "She told me, if anything happens to me, tell Silas he has to wipe the Cayman reserves from his admin account." "I don't even know what that means, Silas." "Cayman reserves." It was a beautiful, invisible noose, and I watched him slide his own neck right into it. Silas wasn't a tech genius. He relied on Harper to manage the digital side of their theft. He didn't know that the FBI had already seized the ledger. He didn't know they already had the offshore account numbers. All he heard was that millions of dollars were sitting in an account untouched, and Harper hadn't destroyed the digital bridge linking his office to the money. "You don't need to worry about what that means." "Elara," Silas said, his voice suddenly smoothing out into a greasy paternal tone. He stood up, adjusting his tie. "You're in shock. Go home. Take the week off. Paid leave." "Are you sure?" I asked, clutching the strap of my tote bag tighter. "I'm positive. I'll handle this mess." I turned around and walked out of the office. I didn't look back, but as I walked down the carpeted hallway, I heard the frantic, heavy clicking of his keyboard. I took the elevator down to the lobby, stepped out onto the wet sidewalk, and pulled my phone from my pocket. I dialed the direct number Agent Harrison had given me. He picked up on the second ring. "Harrison," he grunted. "Agent Harrison, it's Elara Davis," I said, my voice steady, the trembling victim act instantly discarded. The cold air felt good against my face. "You asked me earlier if I knew anything about Silas Vance's involvement. I didn't know anything for sure, but he's acting very erratic. He just locked me out of his office, and I think he's accessing the offshore banking portals right now From the main company server, there was a sharp silence on the line. I could hear the immediate shift in the room behind him, the sudden scraping of chairs. "Are you certain, Ms. Davis?" Harrison asked, his voice deadly quiet. "I can see his monitor through the glass." I lied flawlessly. "He's logging into a portal with a palm tree logo." "Get out of the building, Ilara. Do not let him see you." "I'm already on the street," I said. I hung up. I walked down to the corner coffee shop, ordered a black drip coffee, and sat at a high-top table facing the office building. 20 minutes later, 3 black SUVs aggressively hopped the curb, stopping right in front of the glass double doors. The same men in windbreakers rushed the lobby. I sipped my coffee. It was bitter burnt and entirely perfect. 10 minutes after that, they brought Silas out in handcuffs. He wasn't crying. He was screaming, his face purple with rage, fighting against the agent's grip as they shoved his head down to clear the roof of the vehicle. By logging into the accounts from his own IP address, with his own administrative credentials, he had just given the FBI the absolute undeniable digital footprint they needed. He had sealed the vault from the inside. I watched the taillights of the SUVs disappear into the city traffic. 2 down. Neither of them would ever see the outside of a federal penitentiary again. I threw my empty paper cup into the trash bin. The phantom ache in my ribs was entirely gone. The county correctional facility smelled exactly how I remembered. It was a deeply specific stench, a cocktail of industrial floor wax, cheap institutional bleach sweat, and the sharp metallic tang of raw anxiety. It clung to the back of my throat the moment I walked through the heavy steel double doors. My stomach did a slow, sickening roll, but I forced my feet to keep moving. I handed my driver's license to the board deputy behind the bulletproof glass, signed the visitor's log, and followed the yellow line painted on the scuffed linoleum floor. I wasn't wearing a yellow raincoat today. I wore a thick, dark green wool sweater and comfortable jeans. I looked grounded. I looked alive. The visitation room was a long, sterile corridor, divided by thick, smudged plexiglass. Metal stools were bolted to the floor on either side. A row of black telephone receivers hung on the walls. I sat down at booth number 4. The metal stool was freezing through my denim. I waited. 2 minutes later, the heavy metal door on the inmate's side clanged open. A female guard led Harper into the room. The breath caught in my throat. Seeing her in that oversized, violently orange jumpsuit, the exact same jumpsuit I had died in, sent a violent electrical shock straight down my spine. My hands started to shake, a fine, uncontrollable tremor. I clamped them down on my thighs, digging my nails into the denim. Harper looked terrible. It had only been 4 days, but the county jail had aggressively stripped away the glossy veneer she relied on to survive. Her blonde hair was greasy and flat, tucked behind her ears. The dark circles under her eyes looked like bruises. The arrogant, bubbly light that usually danced in her expression had been completely extinguished, replaced by a hollow, cornered desperation. She sat down on the stool across from me. She didn't look at my face. She picked up the black telephone receiver with trembling hands. I picked mine up. The plastic was warm and slightly sticky. "Ilara," her voice crackled through the earpiece. It sounded tinny, stripped of its usual melodic warmth. "Ilara, you have to help me. They won't listen to me. I told them I was trying to stop Silas. I told them he forced me to take the ledger. I didn't say anything. I just looked at her. I looked at the slight asymmetry of her left eyebrow, the small scar on her chin, from when she fell off her bike in 5th grade. My identical mirror image. My blood. The person who had calmly watched a judge sentence me to 15 years while she sat in the gallery dabbing her dry eyes with a tissue. "Did you hear me?" Harper's voice pitched up a shrill note of panic bleeding through. She pressed her free hand against the plexiglass. "You have to tell them, Chloe. You have to tell them I was home with you. You have to tell them I was confused. Say I had a mental break. Please." "They're talking about 20 years. 20 years, Ilara. I can't tell them you were home with me, Harper," I said. My voice was incredibly calm. It didn't belong in this room. It belonged in a quiet library or a shaded park. "You weren't home. You were in the back of an Uber, wearing my clothes, carrying my ID, running away with $2 million of stolen grant money." Harper froze. Her jaw slackened. She stared at me, really looked at me, for the first time since she sat down. She was looking for the pushover. She was looking for the sister who forgave everything, the sister who took the blame for the broken vase, the stolen lipstick, the dented car bumper. But the sister she was looking for was buried in a prison cemetery, in a timeline she couldn't remember. The silence stretched thick and heavy, vibrating through the coiled phone cord. Slowly, the desperate pleading expression slid off her face. It was like watching a snake shed its skin in real time. The panic vanished, replaced by a cold, hard reptilian calculation. Her eyes narrowed. "You poured out the tea," she whispered. "Chamomile gives me nightmares," I replied. Harper's breath hitched. She leaned closer to the glass, her knuckles turning white around the receiver. You knew I was leaving. The cops, they were already there. They were waiting in the alley. You called them. I tipped them off," I corrected softly. 3 days ago, I told them exactly what time you'd leave and exactly what you'd be wearing." "You psycho," she hissed, the venom finally spilling out, burning through her victim act. "You set me up. You framed your own sister." "I framed you." A dark, ugly laugh clawed its way up my throat. It sounded like tearing paper. "You put my ID in your pocket, Harper. You packed your bags while I was supposedly passed out on the couch. You were going to leave me in that apartment to take the fall for everything you and Silas did. I didn't frame you. I just opened the door and let you walk into the dark." "I'm going to tell them," Harper shrieked, slamming her palm against the glass so hard it rattled the partition. A guard at the end of the room took a step forward, a hand resting on his utility belt. "I'm going to tell the FBI everything I'll tell them. You knew I'll drag you down with me. Ilara, I swear to God." "Tell them what?" I asked, leaning in my face, inches from the smudged glass. "That I didn't drink the drugs you tried to slip me. That I didn't let you steal my identity. That I survived." I paused, letting the words sink into her. "Silas gave them everything they needed. He logged into the offshore accounts right from the office. He verified the ledger you were carrying. You two built a beautiful, airtight case against yourselves. The FBI doesn't care about the sister who stayed home." Harper stared at me, her chest heaving under the orange fabric. The reality of the trap, the absolute finality of it, was finally crushing down on her. The walls were closing in, and I was the one who had locked the door. "Why?" She choked out a genuine tear, finally breaking loose, sliding down her pale cheek. "Why are you doing this to me, Chloe? We're blood." I looked at her tear. I felt absolutely nothing. The well was entirely dry. "Because," I said, my voice dropping to a harsh, ragged whisper, "survival of the fittest." I hung the receiver up. It clicked into the cradle with a heavy final thud. I stood up, adjusting my sweater, and turned my back on the plexiglass. Harper started screaming, my name. Her voice, muffled and distorted by the thick glass, her fists pounding against the barrier. I didn't turn around. I didn't look back. I walked down the yellow line, through the heavy steel doors, and out into the cold, clean air of the world she would never see again. I took a deep breath. The air smelled like rain in wet pavement. It smelled like freedom. And for the first time in 2 lifetimes, I wasn't afraid of the dark. The silence in the apartment didn't feel peaceful. It felt like a vacuum, sucking the oxygen straight out of my lungs. I spent the first 3 days, after Harper's arrest, sitting on the faded floral sofa, waiting for the timeline to snap like a rubber band and pull me back to the concrete floor of the prison shower. Every time the radiator clanked, my heart slammed against my ribs. Every time a police siren wailed in the distance, my hands went numb. I was waiting for the universe to realize a mistake had been made. You don't get to cheat death and rewrite history without paying a toll. But the days just kept ticking by, ordinary, mundane, and brutally slow. By Thursday, the sheer weight of Harper's leftover presence became suffocating. The entire apartment reeked of her. Her peach blossom body spray lingered in the bathroom grout. Her synthetic vanilla candles sat on the windowsill. Her expensive stolen money cashmere sweaters mocked me from the closet we shared. I went to the corner bodega and bought 3 boxes of heavy-duty black trash bags, a gallon of industrial bleach, and a pair of yellow rubber gloves. I started in the bathroom. I swept her expensive makeup into the black plastic, the $40 lipsticks, the glass foundation bottles, the sable hair brushes. They hit the bottom of the bag with a heavy, satisfying clatter. I didn't sort. I didn't hesitate. I scrubbed the porcelain sink with bleach until the fumes burned my eyes, and my throat felt raw. I wanted to scour the very concept of her out of the drywall. When I moved to the bedroom, it got harder. Not because I missed her, but because identical twins share everything. There was no clear boundary between where my life ended and hers began. I found a shoebox shoved under her side of the bed. Inside was a stack of rubber-banded cash, about $5,000 in crisp hundreds, and a photograph from our 10th birthday. I sat on the edge of the mattress, staring at the photo. We were wearing matching denim overalls. We had the same gap-toothed smile, the same chaotic blonde frizz. My mother had written Harper and Ilara 2 halves of a whole in blue ink on the white border. My stomach gave a slow, painful roll. I wasn't grieving the girl in the county jail. I was grieving the little girl in the overalls, the sister I thought I had, before the money and the greed hollowed her out. I took the photograph, tore it straight down the middle, separating the 2 halves of the whole. I threw Harper's half into the trash bag. I kept mine. I kept the money, too. The FBI had seized her bank accounts, but they didn't know about the petty cash. I figured it was the least she owed me for the year I had spent eating institutional gray meat in my past life. That night, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror. The harsh overhead fluorescent bulb cast deep shadows under my eyes. I looked exactly like her. The FBI agent saw it. The bodega clerk saw it. I saw it. Every time I caught my reflection in a storefront window, I saw the girl who had calmly packed a duffel bag while I was supposedly drugged and unconscious in the next room. My own face was a trigger. I opened the medicine cabinet and took out the heavy steel fabric shears Harper used to alter her dresses. I didn't think about it. I just grabbed a fistful of my long blonde hair, clamped the cold metal blades near the root, and squeezed. The thick crunch of the hair severing was loud in the quiet bathroom. A long blonde clump hit the linoleum. I kept cutting. I hacked it all off, leaving uneven, jagged pieces that barely brushed the tops of my ears. It looked terrible. It looked violent. But when I finally set the scissors down, my hands trembling, my chest heaving, I didn't look like Harper anymore. I looked like a stranger. I went to the drugstore the next morning, wearing a beanie, pulled down low, and bought a box of midnight black hair dye. I spent an hour leaning over the bleach-scoured sink, working the thick, dark chemical paste into my ruined hair. When I washed it out and dried it, the transformation was jarring. The black hair made my skin look paler, my eyes sharper, colder. The soft, approachable twin was dead. The willing lamb had been slaughtered. Agent Harrison called me 2 days later. "Ms. Davis." His gravelly voice crackled over the phone. "We've finalized the indictment. The paper trail Vance left on the server matches the physical ledger we recovered from your sister perfectly. It's an open and shut case. Is she—" I swallowed, forcing my voice to tremble just enough. "Has she confessed?" Harrison sighed, the sound heavy with the exhaustion of dealing with criminals who refuse to accept reality. "No, she's still sticking to her story. She claims you masterminded the whole thing. She says you cut your hair to make yourself look like a victim, that you planted the evidence. Her public defender is trying to order a psychiatric evaluation." A cold thrill spiked in my chest. Let her scream. "I don't understand," I whispered, gripping the phone. "Why does she hate me so much? I would have given her anything. People cornered by their own greed will chew off their own legs to escape Alara. And when they run out of legs, they chew on whoever is closest." Harrison paused. "You're clear. You're completely exonerated. The grand jury convenes next month and will need you to testify, but you have nothing to worry about. You're safe." "Thank you, Agent Harrison," I said softly. I hung up the phone. I walked to the window, looking out over the busy city street. The rain had washed the pavement clean. I pressed my palm against the cold glass. I was safe. The timeline was secure. The courtroom smelled of lemon polish, old paper, and stale air conditioning. It was mid-April. 6 months had passed since the night in the rain. 6 months of depositions, of tearful interviews with prosecutors, of playing the shattered, innocent sister. I was exhausted. The performance was draining the marrow directly from my bones, but I couldn't drop the mask until the gavel fell. I sat in the witness chair, the dark mahogany, smooth beneath my sweaty palms. The itchy wool of my conservative navy suit felt like a cage. Across the room, sitting at the defense table, was Harper. She was drowning. The county jail had finished the job it started. She had lost at least 15 pounds. Her collarbones sharply protruded against the neckline of the oversized beige blouse her public defender had provided. Her roots had grown out a stark, greasy blonde against the dull brown. But it was her eyes that made my breath catch. They were feral. The moment I walked into the courtroom, her eyes locked onto mine and hadn't let go. There was no bubbly facade left. There was no guilt either. Just a bottomless, toxic well of pure hatred. Silas sat at a separate table, flanked by 2 expensive private defense attorneys. He looked older, his hair significantly grayer, but he refused to look at me. He had spent the last 6 months claiming Harper manipulated him, that she had hacked his computer. Harper claimed Silas coerced her, threatening her job. It was a beautiful, chaotic circular firing squad, and I was just the tragic bystander caught in the crossfire. Ms. Davis, the prosecuting attorney, a sharp woman named Gallagher, stood near the jury box. Can you describe your relationship with your sister prior to October 28th? I looked at the jury. 12 strangers, their faces a mix of sympathy and morbid curiosity. We were close, I said. My voice was quiet, steady, carrying easily over the microphone. We're identical twins. We shared an apartment. We shared a life. I thought she was my best friend. I didn't have to fake the tremor in my voice. The betrayal was real. It just belonged to a different timeline. Did you ever suspect she was funneling millions of dollars out of the Horizon Housing Initiative? No, never. I looked down at my hands. Harper told me she was working late to fix accounting errors. I believed her. When she asked me to sign for delivered documents, I did it because her wrists hurt. I trusted her blindly. Gallagher nodded sympathetically. And, on the night of her arrest, she gave you a cup of tea. Yes, chamomile. But you didn't drink it. No, it was too hot, and I have a weird aversion to chamomile. It gives me bad dreams. So I poured it out when she went to shower. I just pretended to drink it, so I wouldn't hurt her feelings. It was the perfect lie, a small, mundane detail that explained everything without making me look calculating. And then you fell asleep on the couch. I dozed off, yes, I said. When I woke up, the apartment was empty. My coat was gone. My wallet was empty. My ID was missing. Thank you, Ms. Davis. Gallagher sat down. Harper's public defender stood up, a tired-looking man with a cheap tie and a permanent slouch. He walked toward the podium, shuffling his notes. Ms. Davis, you claim you were asleep when your sister supposedly stole your identity. Yes, yet the arresting officers reported that a tip was called in 3 days prior, a tip detailing exactly what time the suspect would leave and exactly what she would be wearing. How do you explain that? I kept my face perfectly slack. I had rehearsed this. The FBI had already run the audio of the tip line call. They couldn't conclusively match the muffled voice to me or Harper. I don't explain it, sir. I said, my voice rising just a fraction, injecting a note of helpless frustration. I didn't make that call. Maybe Silas made it. Maybe one of her accomplices got cold feet. All I know is that my sister left me alone in our apartment with a planted ledger, hoping the FBI would kick my door down instead of hers. The lawyer frowned. He paced a few steps. You and your sister are identical, correct? Yes, genetically identical. But she is sitting there, facing 20 years in federal prison, and you are sitting here as the star witness. Isn't it entirely possible, Miss Davis, that you were the one running the accounts? That you set her up to take the fall? Objection! Gallagher snapped, standing up. Argumentative. Pure speculation. Sustained, the judge barked. Move on, counselor. But the lawyer didn't need an answer. He had planted the seed in the jury's mind. I could see 2 of the jurors shift uncomfortably, looking between me and Harper. The identical faces, the black hair versus the blonde. I didn't panic. I turned my head very slowly and looked directly at Harper. She was trembling. She gripped the edge of the defense table so hard her knuckles were white. She mouthed the word monster at me. I let my face slip just for a fraction of a second. Just long enough for her to see it, and no one else. The jury couldn't see my expression. The judge couldn't see it. Only Harper. I gave her a tiny, asymmetrical smirk. Her reaction was instantaneous and explosive. "She did it!" Harper screamed, leaping out of her chair. The heavy oak chair crashed backward onto the floor. Look at her. Look at her face. She's laughing at me. She framed me. "I'm going to kill you. Ilara, I swear to God, I'm going to kill you." Chaos erupted. The judge banged his gavel repeatedly, shouting over the noise. Two bailiffs rushed the defense table, grabbing Harper by the arms, dragging her backward as she kicked and thrashed, her voice shredding into a hysterical, animalistic shriek. "She knows. She knew everything. She's a psychopath." I shrank back in the witness chair. I brought my hands to my mouth, my eyes wide with terror, tears instantly springing to my lashes. I let out a choked sob, turning my face away from her, as if I couldn't bear the sight. The jury recoiled. They saw a deranged guilty woman, violently threatening her traumatized victim. Any seed of doubt the defense attorney had planted was instantly incinerated by Harper's own lack of control. "Get her out of my courtroom," the judge roared. They dragged her through the heavy wooden side doors. Her screams echoed down the marble hallway, fading into a muffled, pathetic wail before finally falling silent. The courtroom was dead quiet, save for the hum of the HVAC unit. Silas sat at his table, staring at the empty space, where Harper had been his face, the color of wet ash. He knew it was over. The jury's faces were hard as stone. The judge rubbed his temples. "Miss Davis, are you all right to continue?" I wiped a tear from my cheek, my hand shaking visibly. I took a deep, shuddering breath. "Yes, Your Honor. I just want this to be over." It was over 2 days later. Guilty on all counts: wire fraud, conspiracy, embezzlement, identity theft. Silas got 12 years. Harper got 18. I wasn't in the courtroom to hear the sentence. I read it on a news alert on my phone while sitting in an empty coffee shop 3 blocks away. I drank my black coffee, watched the steam rise, and felt absolutely, terrifyingly nothing. A year is a strange measurement of time. It can feel like a century, or it can feel like a single held breath. It was mid-October again, exactly 2 years since my first death, and exactly 1 year since I watched my sister walk into the police trap. The apartment was packed. Stacked brown cardboard boxes lined the living room walls, sealed with heavy packing tape. I had sold the faded floral sofa. I threw out the clanking radiator cover. The only thing left in the kitchen was a single mug and the coffee maker. I had spent the last year entirely alone. The Horizon Housing Initiative had collapsed under the weight of the scandal shuttering its doors. The state stepped in to audit everything. I took the small severance package they offered the innocent employees and disappeared into the city's anonymity. I worked as a data entry clerk from home for a small logistics company. I didn't make friends. I didn't date. I didn't talk to my neighbors. The paranoia that had kept me alive during those first few weeks had calcified into a permanent hard shell. I couldn't trust anyone because I knew exactly what human beings were capable of when their survival was on the line. But staying in the city was a mistake. Every time it rained, I smelled wet pavement and saw red and blue lights. Every time I passed a drugstore, I thought about the crushed Xanax. So I was leaving. I had a one-way train ticket to Portland, a new coast, a new time zone, and a new name. The legal process for a name change was surprisingly easy if you had a clean criminal record and paid the administrative fees. The judge had asked me why I wanted to change it. I told him my given name was tied to a very public, very painful federal scandal involving my family, and I wanted a fresh start. He signed the paperwork without a second thought. Ilara Davis was dead. She had died in a prison shower in a forgotten timeline, and she had died again the moment I severed my ties to my twin. My new driver's license sat on the kitchen counter. Maya Linwood. It felt strange on my tongue, but it felt safe. I zipped up my heavy winter coat, a dark olive green, definitively not yellow, and picked up my duffel bag. I stood in the doorway of the apartment one last time, letting my eyes sweep over the scuffed laminate floors and the peeling wallpaper near the baseboards. This was the room where I had woken up gasping for air. This was the room where I had made the choice to become the predator instead of the prey. I didn't feel triumphant. There was no soaring music playing in my head. Winning this game didn't leave me with a sense of righteous justice. It just left me deeply, permanently scarred. I had looked at my own blood, my own reflection, and ruthlessly engineered her destruction. I was alive, but a part of my humanity had been permanently amputated. I closed the door. The deadbolt clicked into place with a heavy final sound. The train station was crowded. A chaotic sea of rolling suitcases, spilled coffee, and overlapping announcements echoing off the vaulted ceiling. I found my platform, boarded the train, and found a window seat near the back of the car. I sat down, putting my bag on the empty seat beside me. The train lurched forward, the metal wheels squealing against the tracks, as we slowly pulled out of the dark station and into the pale gray morning light. I watched the city skyline recede. The tall glass buildings, the dirty brick tenements, the bridges spanning the cold river. It all grew smaller and smaller until it was just a blur on the horizon. I pressed my hand against my right side, right below my ribs. For the first time since I woke up, choking on stale air in that apartment, there was no phantom pain, no burning white-hot tear of the shank, no tight knot of muscle bracing for an impact that wasn't coming. The ghost was finally gone. I leaned my head back against the seat, closing my eyes, and listened to the rhythmic, steady clacking of the train wheels carrying me further and further away. I didn't know who Maya Linwood was going to be. I didn't know if she would ever learn how to trust a smile, or if she would spend the rest of her life checking the locks twice. But as I took a deep, clear breath of the stale train air, my lungs expanding fully, without a single ache, I knew one thing for certain. I survived. And in this world, that was the only victory that mattered. If you made it to the end of Maya's dark, twisted journey, hit that like button. Let me know in the comments. Did Ilara go too far to protect herself? Or did Harper get exactly what she deserved? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more raw, intense psychological dramas just like this one, and share this video with a friend who loves a ruthless revenge story. Ring that notification bell so you never miss an upload. Your support keeps these stories alive. Until next time, watch your back.